Hey everyone, hopefully you can hear me and see everything fine. Just to let you know, I'm Simon, and I'm a PhD student in my final year, and this is in the psychology department, but also I have lots of communication with the philosophy department as well because of the nature of my work. And I'm one of the people here tasked with telling you about life as a PhD student and what it's like taking this on. So I'll be answering questions about, whether we're all nervous wrecks and wondering how we all made such poor life decisions. Or not really. So the nature of my work is in moral reasoning or moral cognition. So like the processes involved in moral judgments and what makes us behave morally or otherwise. So I kind of look at how people make decisions about right and wrong and good and evil and blame and punishment, that sort of thing. But I actually came to psychology quite late because for 8 years or so I was a 3D artist or an animator, that sort of thing. And the sort of work that I did was in, architectural visualization or product visualization or making TV adverts or animating lots of football boots for Adidas, which got very annoying. And I also taught animation to undergraduates. So I did have some teaching experience as well. And all of these images that you can see are the things I used to work on before I moved to psychology. And the advantage of me doing this is because I had lots of experience doing virtual reality work. And virtual reality is something that psychologists have become increasingly interested in as a device for performing research. And this enabled me to break into psychology research for my master's degree. So for my master's, I did some virtual reality study designs. And perhaps to some of you, animation might seem as a job much cooler than being an academic. But I just wanted to really do science and have for a long time. And I'm really lucky to have been given this opportunity. So as it happens, my PhD isn't using virtual reality at all, which is quite useful because of the COVID lockdowns. It would have been very hard to get participants and have them in the same room. But it's also much easier just answering questions, online questionnaires. It makes life easier and that might seem less fancy. Yeah, but it's great as long as they're not just clicking through randomly. So my PhD work essentially involves our motivations to act morally. And specifically, it's about our reactions to someone in our social group when they've done something that appears to be morally wrong. And for this, I'm looking at two strategies. So the first strategy is partner choice, and the other strategy is partner control. Now, these are basically partner choices, just picking and choosing who you want to be your social partners, who you want to be in your group. And if you don't want them in your group, then you would ostracize them or avoid them or not include them. And this other strategy, partner control, is just basically punishing people for doing wrong, but keeping them in the group. And I'm looking at when people engage in one versus the other. So, for example, right, yeah, so for example, I make predictions about people on the political right being more likely to engage in partner control, so keeping people in the group punishing, whereas people on the political left would be more likely to have people coming in and out of their group with ease, so wrongdoers could just be avoided. But the results are a lot more complicated than this, obviously. I'm also doing lots of other work as well, so I'm looking at our motivations for charitable giving, how you act when you feel obligated to give versus whether you just want to give. I'm also looking at the moral standing of animals, for example, how we decide that it's worse for a dog to suffer than, say, for a cow to suffer. And finally, how we judge behaviours to be intentional or not, because we answer these questions about intentionality seemingly really differently when the outcome is morally salient compared to when it's just neutral. So when I first started my PhD, I was sat in a room having people give a talk just like this, that we are now, telling you about PhD life. And the gist of it was that doing a PhD is really, really hard, and you'll probably have a nervous breakdown and fear and suffering and the apocalypse and etc. So yeah, I just want to put a different spin on it than that. So like when I was an animator, I was working for myself. I earned lots more money and it was a really fun job. But since deciding to be a psychologist, I have not regretted the decision, and doing a PhD, I've not regretted the decision even slightly. It is really hard, but when you're working on questions that you really want to answer, that you're really interested in, it's really fulfilling, it's really fun. It's even true when your experiments aren't bloody working, which happens a lot. unfortunately. So like if you find yourself kind of looking something up just that you're interested in, and like hours later you've got 5 Wikipedia articles open on your desktop, and you're struggling to keep your eyes open because you're wanting to learn more about things, then a PhD probably really is for you, because that's kind of what life is like. Only the difference is that we'd have 50 tabs open and there'd all be research articles, and it'd be about 4 AM in the morning, and you'll have forgotten to eat or move, and then it's your girlfriend's or boyfriend's birthday, and in fact that they'd left you years ago because you wouldn't stop talking about moral dilemmas. So yeah, I love going into the office with our big whiteboard and each of us going over what we're all working on. So these are my PhD colleagues, and picking each other's brains and trying to answer interesting questions like why people believe conspiracy theories, or how might we get people to believe really ridiculous conspiracy theories, and how we might, turn these into published papers together, hopefully. Or how can sometimes corner an academic in the corridor, which is difficult right now because there is no corridor, whose work I'm excited about, and I can they're happy to chat with me for ages about their work and then give me advice on mine. So basically it's been a really positive experience, as I hope it will be for any of you who decide to give this a try. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much, Simon. There is one question which is a little bit related to your presentation. How do we go about approaching a supervisor for STEM-related fields and propose a research question? I'm not sure if you can answer that, but if you can.
No, that's a really good question. This is basically what I did, is rather than looking at advertised PhDs, I was interested in, because I've always been interested in morality, so I kind of kept up with the research before I even was doing it. So I had in mind a few people to talk to. So basically I read their most recent papers, and on the understanding that I was interested in what they were doing, I'd just send them an email. Obviously this is in psychology, so I don't know how it works in STEM, but when you send researchers emails, at least in this field, and it's genuine interest that you have, they are very likely to get back to you and like explain things, and you will just tell them, I want to do a PhD, I'm really interested in your work, and this is why. And would that be possible? Are you taking on any students? And just engage in an honest conversation about what you want to do and why you want to do it with them. And you're very likely to get response. Now, they might not have funding for PhDs, or they might suggest, oh, this has happened to me as well. I was told by a particular academic that they weren't taking on any PhDs right now, but their former student, who's now a professor, is, and I should contact them. And then you can also ask them to recommend other academics in the field and whatnot. Just have an honest conversation, and they probably will get back to you as long as it's genuine. I think that was my experience anyway.
Thank you very much. There are no other questions as for now. So the next person.
All right, I'll figure out how the sharing thing works then. I hope you can see this, because otherwise I don't know what to do.
I can see it.
Cool. All right, so hey everyone, my name's Merle, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about my PhD experience. So to give you a bit of a background, because especially if you're here with regards to doing a PhD in behavioral science, you might have either a very similar background to mine, or there's a wide range of possibilities here. So I actually did a liberal arts degrees in my home country, the Netherlands, and then decided to do a behavioral economics C-type master's, which I did at Warwick, and I went to the UK to do that, where I did the MSc in Behavioral and Economic Science. I met, I've met various people during that course, but I met Neil and Andrea. Both of them were teachers of mine, and they actually agreed to supervise my PhD, whereas I am also currently in my final year, just like Simon is. My PhD is officially in behavioral science, sort of. At least it's the behavioral science specification, which is in the business and management track within the Warwick Business School. And my topic is just looking at payment methods, especially contactless and mobile payments, and how that relates to how we handle and perceive money. Now, should probably be mentioned, because a lot of you will very much be interested in how to apply to a PhD. If you're in a master's program already and you do think that you're going to stay at the university that you're currently at, it is probably a good idea to be supervised by at least one of your previous teachers. They know who you are, you know who they are, and that already takes a lot of risk out of this idea of, the ability to end up with anyone, because not every supervisor or supervisee is a match for each other. So if you know that at least you are able to deal with one of your teachers as a person and as a researcher, that's already a pretty good start. Which is essentially also what this slide is kind of about. So if you want to get into a PhD, you do need to know people. So, you know, who do you know that you can get along with professionally? I mean, they don't have to become your best friends. And for a lot of people, it is important to know what your own working style is. Do you like to work very independently or very dependently? Because some supervisors will meet you once a month and some supervisors will meet you once a week, and you can email them at 3 in the morning. There is a wide range of types and styles of supervisors and supervising styles. So this is probably something to really look out for. Now, some universities and some groups don't just give you one supervisor, they really work in research groups, and your PhD is actually part of a larger project. So you will have several colleagues who are also PhDs who are working towards the same goal or on topics which are very much interlinked or related. So in that case, you're not only going to have to look out for a single supervisor which might suit you, but you have to figure out a research group that you think you would be a good fit for. Research groups tend to advertise quite aggressively if they have a position available, but supervisors, it's a bit more it's a bit more interpersonal. You have to figure out, you know, whether you write with that person, talk about the PhD a bit, in very much the same manner as Simon has just suggested when he answered that question. For a PhD, I would never, and I would like to emphasize this, never recommend doing an unfunded PhD. I think it's a form of slavery. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I know you should not be taken off advantage like that. But the finance aspect of a PhD is quite important because you're committing to 3 to 5 years, depending on your scheme, of relatively low pay, and literally you should get paid for this. So there's a couple of ways to figure out your finances. Sometimes the department of the research group has money available. That's why the PhD is funded. Sometimes you have previous work experience or like industry experience and you're doing a PhD through a company. If that is possible for you, you should really do that. It tends to be the financially most stable way. You can also apply to actual funding schemes which are not affiliated with your university per se, but they might be affiliated with your the country that you're doing the PhD in, your actual home country, or maybe even something like the EU PhD scheme, because there's continent-based schemes as well. So really figure out where the money is coming from that's going to feed you for approximately 4 years. Quite important. And when you're trying to get into a PhD, you should probably know your topic to some extent. I mean, Simon is in moral decision making. I'm very much in personal finance. These are very different topics, and as a result, they will require very different supervisors, very different departments sometimes even, and the research proposal will look very different. So keep that in mind, that your supervisor does need to match your topic somewhat. So when you're finally in the PhD, there are still some stumbling blocks. I know this all sounds very negative, but I'm just, you know, I mean, I don't have to tell you that if you want to be an academic, you have to do a PhD and it's all going to be sunshine and rainbows, because it won't be. You should probably be more aware of the stumbling blocks. Some people really enjoy being in the PhD because there is absolutely no structure. And then if you want to work 12 to 12, you figure out which way around, that's fine. And if you want to work 9 to 5, that is fine too. And if you only want to work 3 days per week and you can meet all your targets in that time limit, that is fine too. There is absolutely no real structure in how to do a PhD, and some people really, really enjoy that. Now, another stumbling block when in the PhD is still your supervisors. They are people after all, and interpersonal relationships can be very tricky. If you feel like you really, really, really do not get on with your supervisor, you can always take on a second one, which you're very likely to have as well. And if that doesn't even work out, you can still take a third one. Switching supervisors is really not as uncommon as people think, and having more collaborations outside of your supervisory unit is also quite common. So there's ways around it. Knowing what to do is actually quite in line with structure. It's just 4 years and you need to write out chapters and hopefully some papers. For some people, again, it is quite difficult to know what you should be doing when. Money might be an issue, but there's plenty of solutions for that. You can teach, and a lot of people that I know have side hustles next to their PhD. Publications is something that you have to keep in mind. The publishing process is slow and just bloody annoying. And then the idea of the future is very much tied into mental health, to the extent that I don't think I know many PhD students who don't have a form of anxiety. So keep that in mind. So I'll tell you a bit more detailed about my experience. So, I mean, this is not in any way, shape, or form representative of what your experience might be like or should be like. But in year one, it's very likely you're still going to have some modules. You can't really avoid that. I got lucky to the extent where I was able to run my first study in December and was able to analyze most of this stuff as well. I got stuck with a dissertation because I'm in a 1+3 program, meaning that my first year of the PhD was another master's, and the rest of the year was predominantly brainstorming. Now, in year 2 is when the structure really gets knocked out of you, so you have no more modules. And then I just kind of continued to brainstorm, continued to write up, you know, do some analysis. And then is when you actually really should go to conferences, and you can also start teaching. And when I say you should go to conferences, in this case, well, thanks to Corona, they're online conferences, but you, as a PhD student, you really have to go to conferences. Year 3 was predominantly Corona-based. So I had to shift a lot of stuff online. Within the PhD, it is expected of you that you're quite flexible, whether that's for better or for worse. Online conferences are a bit of a pain, but in all fairness, they're completely fine. I was still teaching, which was also fine. And it's just a lot of, you know, you're on your own at home. There's nothing really going on. Everything's online. Figure it out. And currently I am in year 4. When I made this presentation, we just finished term 1. That's still true. My projects are largely written up, but even in the PhD, that kind of means that you're just continuously editing. And as soon as you change one part of your analysis, you have to rewrite entire parts. That is just a fact. Some of my online studies have been postponed once more because one of them needs real life interaction, which is just a mess during Corona. And of course, as I said, there will be more conferences, and in year 4 you should really start looking for jobs or postdocs, and you should by this stage probably know whether you want to go into industry or want to stay in academia, because the job application process is very different. This is a shameless plug I would like to add before I start to go through the slide. This is my beautiful blog. It's called Money on the Mind, and I do actually write quite a lot about the PhD experience. So if you have any like in-depth questions that we might not get into, I think this is a pretty decent source to go into. I mean, I genuinely get quite brutally honest here. So everything from teaching or fighting with your supervisor and how to manage time, it's all on there. And that is essentially it. So I think I just immediately stopped sharing my screen. I think it literally just dropped out. Well, I hope that worked. I'm technologically not that advanced, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, Meryl. There is a question: what PhD topic you think it has growing interest that is related to behavioral economics?
Ooh. It's a really good question. It also has like a massive variety of answers. I think a topic that I've seen come up a lot is currently anything with diversification, where I mean that people want to, so there's a lot of like really classical studies in behavioral economics that just never have been done with people that weren't white undergrads in the West. So I think any research that goes beyond the West and moves more into countries like India or China or just Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America, any studies that are done there, I think, are much more interesting currently than anything being conducted in the West. And that gives you more of a demographic than that gives you a topic. But I think most behavioral scientific research hasn't been carried out in those countries specifically. So if that's of any interest to you, I would definitely pick that as a topic.
Okay, thank you very much. And there is also one question for Simon. Given that you were working for a few years and then decided to do a PhD, how difficult did you find it going back into academia? From a personal perspective, did you find it stressful, but also from the academics perspective, did you find it difficult to get accepted?
No to all those questions. I felt like it may have been advantageous. It's hard to say really, but there was certainly no stress in getting back into academia. When I was filling out the, the forms that you do when you apply, you get a lot of questions asked about your life experience, and it seems to, if you have some extra life experience, it seems to give you an advantage. As well as being slightly older, I think people maybe unconsciously, maybe being too psychological here, but I think maybe people take you a bit more seriously if you're a bit older. Academics, when I say that, I could be wrong about that. It's just what it feels like.
I don't think you're wrong about that.
Okay.
No, I think having work experience, I mean, I have none. I came straight out of my master's and I moved into the PhD. And I do think you don't have some of the life skills and also some of the professional skills, like not yet, you don't have them yet, you're still lacking them. And that does make moving from, an MSc where, on Monday you have classes 9 to 5, and on Tuesday you've got classes 9 to 1, and then you can finally do, your assignments. And if that's the only system that you're used to, a PhD is like, being hit by a brick. It's very, very different, and it can take people a long time to properly get accustomed to how different it is. Whereas I think if you have some work or industry experience, you're more used to a type of independency.
Mm-hmm. I think it gives you some extra interpersonal skills as well, maybe, that is useful. Like when you first meet a potential supervisor and you have a chat, I think maybe if you've had some life experience, you're more equipped to talk like a normal human being rather than like a student. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Okay, and one more general question. Is there the possibility to conduct a research project in partnership with external behavioral science companies?
Okay, come again.
Oh, sorry, do you want me to repeat?
Yes, please, because I can't see the chat myself.
Is there the possibility to conduct a research project in partnership with external behavioral science companies?
Yeah, I think that is actually possible. I think that should be relatively easy to do. I mean, can you collaborate? I think you can collaborate quite easily. I think what you need most often for a PhD to have a successful research collaboration with a partner in industry is either data or the fact that they allow you to design an intervention with them and then they roll it out. So both of these can be quite advantageous. It is also possible if you've been working in a behavioral science or behavioral economics based company for a long time that they might to some extent sponsor your PhD, or they send you to do a PhD because they want to do more research within their own company. These things do exist. They're not super frequent, but these things do exist. And if you do have a research topic that you think would be of interest to a company and they have additional resources that could help you out with this research, I would definitely reach out to them and try to see if this is possible. Worst case scenario, you just get data, and honestly, I think a lot of people really like to just have enormous amounts of data sets. I know my supervisor is obsessed with it.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the next question is, what are the conferences like in an offline environment and why they are so important?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I don't have to answer that by myself per se. I'm sure Simon, Laios, and Alina have things to say about that as well. But in an offline environment, first of all, you can escape your own university, which sometimes is quite nice. You can meet up with people who study a variety of similar things to you and that you might not meet otherwise. So keep in mind, before we have this, this working from home aesthetic going on, it was actually quite unheard of to send someone a message via LinkedIn or just pop them an email and be like, hey, we work in similar fields or in similar topics. Would you mind, scheduling out half an hour to meet and just talk? I think thanks to Corona, this has become a lot more normalized. So now you could easily reach out to someone, even if they're on a completely different continent, and be like, hey, we do similar things. Do you have half an hour? But beforehand, this is exactly what you did at the offline conference, where it would be a chance meeting, or it would be you actively chasing someone like George Lewenstein, for example, around until he would, give you 5 minutes of his very, very crowded time. So that is, I think, one of the main things for the purpose of offline conferences. In addition to that, as my supervisor keeps hammering, and I'm sure Laios has heard this as well, not because we have the same supervisor, but because he literally keeps saying this wherever we go. Conferences are a really good way for you to present and to learn how to present properly, because that is exactly what's going to prepare you for your job talks. Neil, one of my supervisors, has the habit of counting how many talks there are between now and my job talk. And so this is definitely a good way to prepare. So it's for your presenting skills, it's for the understanding of your research skills, it's for your interpersonal skills. And the more people you know via conferences, the bigger your network is and the more likely you are to get hired somewhere. And I think all of those things are quite important. So Simon, did I nail that, or did I forget something quite important?
No, that sounds about right. Because of COVID and when I started, I haven't been to a conference. Like, I had a couple booked and then they were both cancelled. So I haven't been to a physical conference, which it is somewhat annoying, because I feel like it's probably going to hold me back when I'm applying for postdocs, because I won't have met any of these people in person if I wanted to go do a postdoc with them. So yeah, but I agree with everything.
I just wanted to add that also conferences is something special, because you're surrounded by people who are interested in this concrete topic. So let's say cognitive science, and it's a huge conference. I don't know, there's like thousands of people who are doing this topic. And of course, it's really broad. And then you can find people who are actually interested in your small question. Well, at that point, you don't think it's small, but like, yeah, so conferences can be quite interesting ways to connect. And I would suggest to go to a conference where you don't present, maybe in your first year, just to, I don't know, have fun and meet people. And when you are like, can present something, as a must, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. Keep those questions coming, and maybe now let's have another presentation, and then we're gonna have another break for the remaining questions. So Alina or Laios, whoever is ready now.
Okay, let's go, Laios.
Oh, Laios, you're on mute.
I'm trying to share. Sorry. I can't. Can you see anything?
We can't see your presentation. If you click on the share button on the right, you should be able to share.
On the right.
It's next to your mute button.
Yeah, I did that, but I'm clicking that, but nothing happens. Maybe Alina, you can go, and then I can sort this out, because I can't share my screen.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, I guess I will just have, yeah, so here I'll just describe my reflections. So it's not necessarily how many people experience it, but for me it was, because I recently finished, so I can kind of like reflect wholly, I guess. So for me, a PhD is a research adventure. So, and there are different stages, as in any journey. So the first one is curiosity, and probably there's no kind of no need to do a PhD if you don't have this point, or rather characteristic of your motivation to do a PhD. So yeah, and there's like other stages that I will go in a bit more detail now. Yeah, so the first stage probably is the most important one, and I know that Merle described more kind of more practical ways of getting a PhD. So what is it? But I guess for me it's more like, I don't know, abstract and more kind of, yeah, the reflection type of kind of presentation, I guess. So yeah, curiosity. You're really interested in something, but you're not satisfied with the answers. This is what curiosity, I would like, I don't know, say is for me. And yeah, some topic area or a question, like really it can be quite specific, keep occupying your mind, and you just like, oh, this is really interesting, and you start to read stuff, ask people, talk about it with everyone, and you try to understand the details, so what's going on, and you maybe yeah, start to read some books, or yeah, basically talk to people a lot about it, and you're still not satisfied what is going on, so you don't really understand, and you try to yeah, to know more. So then you realize that papers is actually quite helpful, so they are cutting edge knowledge basically, so you try to read up for like papers for fun. And you realize that professors can be quite useful in understanding this, like the question or the topic or area you are interested in. So the next stage, after I skip the difficulty of getting a PhD, because, but looking, I'm just checking if everything is okay from the other side. Can everyone hear me and see the screen? I hope so.
Yes, it's fine.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, the first stage is basically Euphoria. So it's probably the most kind of shiny stage of a PhD, and it's indeed exciting. You are finally in a research community. So there is like the community of people who are basically like you, but all are slightly different because everyone researches their own question. And so you try to understand the methods and tools that will help you to understand your topic or question easier. And you kind of like want to research all the things. And you kind of do it. And you come to the second stage, which is trialed and failed. And this can be quite low point. So because you, for example, done your first experiment or you run your first survey and it didn't work. And you're just like, wow, but I think I thought about it a lot. I done a lot and it failed. It's like ridiculous. But this is how learning happens. So what you do, you just gather information, then you try it out, and then there is an error or something didn't work really how it's supposed to, but you learn. And next, what next? Of course, you basically repeat this process, but I think it's especially painful in the first time, just because, well, you don't know how bad it can be. But at this stage, I will also say that it can be quite difficult to not associate with your PhD completely. So please don't think that you're a bad person or something if your PhD doesn't work out. That just means that sometimes research questions are quite difficult and you quite can't really figure out what to do with just a PhD. So and this is how basically the learning process works, not only in PhD, but also in academia. So we constantly kind of repeating this loop of kind of hypothesis formation, and then something didn't work out, or we didn't quite answer the questions, and we continue. So yeah, so of course, the next stage, you try to kind of recover, you are getting realistic, and you plan things, which is helpful. So, and of course you realize that there is a lot that you can't do in your PhD because it's limited in time and your ability to do things and read papers. So at this stage, it's probably easier to kind of simplify your research problem and really dig down to one specific question, for example. Oh, and by the way, as Merle also said, PhD is quite unstructured. So, for example, with my supervisor, he said, oh, just like you go and research your own thing. And I spent quite a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly my research question should be. And I spent a year. And then after a year, well, about a year or like 9 months, I did my first experiment. It didn't work. And I was like, okay, I should be even more concrete. But then it helped to think about the impact. So yeah, what exactly do you think you can add, given your skill set, given your interests, and given whatever you read up? So there are millions of papers, but of course you can't read everything. And you just choose your kind of impact, I don't know, collection of researchers that you can help out to figure out some kind of like problem. And of course, you start to think about like what you're actually contributing to. You might be contributing a model, so it's something that have specific variables, and yeah, you examine something really specific, or you develop a theory, or you develop something bigger, which is framework. And of course, you kind of plan your research better this time. So stage 4 is a sweet spot. And I guess this is the stage when you're actually kind of researching, you're kind of enjoying the research process. So why? Because you've done something already and there are some things to do. And you've got a plan, which is always kind of decreasing uncertainty is kind of satisfying. So that's probably it. And of course, you get into conferences and you present your work and you have discussions, and you kind of realize that, okay, PhD is not as isolating, and it can be isolating, but you kind of connect and you can share your ideas and people understand you, which is great. And you think they will criticize you or something, but they actually are quite supportive in academia, or at least when, you know, the discussions can be different, but some constructive discussions are really helpful and make you think deeper about your topic. So I will always advise to kind of go to people and just, yeah, kind of ask for critique, actually. So, and of course, in this sweet spot, you've got still enough time to do research. So you're not pressured for a deadline to submit, for example, and you've got energy. So you still kind of, yeah, you're motivated. So this is the sweet spot. Okay, here comes stage 5, which is procrastination. And it means that you are getting tired, and it's normal. So what does it mean? Yeah, at some point you kind of realize, because you think a lot about your PhD, so it's basically, yeah, it can occupy all your time. And you think about it pretty much all the time, because it's fun, because it's what you do. And yeah, and thesis can be like everything. And if it's everything, you don't think why you should focus concretely on your thesis. So I don't know how to explain it, but I guess on this stage, if you get it, let's discuss, because it's kind of a funny one. And for some reason, life starts to get into your PhD, and it's just like, oh, but I really need kind of to do this, but I can do it later because I need, for example, I don't know, wash my floor or something like this. And thesis can wait. And because as like there is no structure, you have to structure it in a way that to decrease procrastination, and of course get some holidays and rest at this point. Maybe not, it wasn't as important in initial stages, but at this stage, yeah, pretty much you need to rest. And of course, it means that you are somewhere in the end of your PhD, and you need to think about job, probably your funding running out. And of course, it's also doesn't help to focus on your thesis per se. Somehow you can feel tired all the time. It actually like this, you are tired all the time. You can sleep all the time. Yeah, and you can work actually all the time as well. I don't know, this is strange. And you kind of like can't really distinguish between like working and not working. And I don't think online environment really helps with distinguishing this and helping people to have rest and be done with work. But let's discuss it later. So stage 6 is the best and the worst. And yes, it kind of fits together. Why? Well, first off, your social life is at 0 or maybe at minus something, because your deadline is here, it's approaching, but you realize your thesis is like terrible. You don't understand it, and you just like trying to write something. And there is so much to cover. So you kind of decide that, okay, social life is important, but you don't have energy for this. And your self-esteem is kind of disappearing. It just vanishes for the same reason that you realize you've done only a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of work of the actual, like, I don't know, research chair. And you haven't covered like so many topics, and probably your writing, you're not so happy about your writing. You keep getting feedback that is, oh, here is not great, please cover this, delete this, and yeah, so you're pretty much like this, pretty on low point here, some here, maybe 4th year. Okay, but the best part comes from that you actually discover something. And of course, it's a small bit, and maybe, yeah, it's not as exciting as it was in the beginning, but you can use your PhD lens now. So what does it mean? You are a researcher, so I don't know, you made so much effort to discover a small thing, and it's actually research. So you improve the research community in a sense. And now you know how to do research. So I will just, yeah, I don't know how much time I spent, but basically PhD is difficult. And here are my friendly tips for kind of reflecting back, what I would do better if I would do another PhD, probably not. Here we go, well-being. You have to focus, really focus, and then you have to relax. And the proportion of this can vary, but you need to really do this to be productive and happy. Or at least this is what I found to be actually working. Productivity. You can research everything. Because you are a researcher, you realize that you can research everything, but with your thesis, you have to stay really specific. So focus on a tiny bit from your chapter, maybe on a sentence. If you're researching something, yeah, stay specific. Make to-do lists, but probably everyone knows it. And Pomodoro technique, it's great. So when you see that time is running out, you are you just want to use it. So it's like a school type of way of learning. So there's an intense period when you research, and then there's like 10 minutes when you relax, and there's again like, I don't know, again 40 minutes when you focus, and so forth. And career, PhD is hard, it's like really hard. And one does not simply finish a PhD. There's so many unexpected things that can happen. And for example, I needed to work in my last year of a PhD, and half a year I worked full time, and I tried to finish my PhD. So it can be really hard. What does it mean? Probably you need to think about your career after PhD from the start of your PhD, pretty much. So why are you doing PhD in the first place? And of course, you need to look for opportunities. So yeah, this is basically a recap. I will probably leave it here. So if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alina. You've already got one comment, very emotional. You did a great job.
Great.
And then on to the questions. So the first question is, my undergrad was many years ago and it was completed unrelated to behavioral science. However, my master's on behavioral economics. Do they give a lot of weight to the undergrad grades, or would they be more focused on my most recent and related studies grades? I'm afraid that my undergrad might be a constraint to get accepted to a good PhD program.
Yeah, well,
I wouldn't be worried.
For undergrad, yeah, if it's masters, if you do masters, that doesn't matter. So you can recover in masters pretty much. But I should say that for me, masters wasn't an option. So I wanted to do a research, and masters was expensive. So yeah, I kind of needed to get first in order to get a PhD. But if you have the opportunity to do masters, there's lots of also fellowship, if you have time, I should say, to look for masters and fellowships, then yeah, absolutely, you shouldn't worry.
My undergrad was in animation, and I was lucky to get into a conversion master's into psychology. And basically, that was it. Once I'd had my psychology qualification, it was fine to jump onto a psychology PhD. That was just my experience, though.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is, I'm currently finalizing my MBA, thinking about pursuing DBA. I see the topic of behavioral economics very interesting and pretty new in my country, in Egypt. Just thinking where to start.
Where to start doing behavioral economics? I mean, a DBA is very much business oriented, so I would just start reading. Just literally look up behavioral applications, or like behavioral scientific applications in business, and take it from there. Personally, I'm not super versed in that field, if I'm being really honest.
Okay, anyone wants to add something, or? Okay, then the next question. Is the choice of behavioral science PhD subject largely constrained by the university, LSE versus Warwick, for example, and what they specialize in? Or do you have some bandwidth to pursue a subject that you are interested in with some more general direction from a PhD supervisor?
I'd say the latter. I mean, if you really want to go to LSE, like go to LSE. But I think most people, if you were to go to LSE now, for example, to work with Paul Dolan, who's very well known, like you don't go to work with Paul Dolan because he's at LSE. You go to work with Paul Dolan because he studies happiness and well-being, of which we also have people doing that at Warwick, for example, Andrew Oswald, Natavut or Nick Pautavi. You know, they study happiness and well-being. That's what you would show up for. And happiness and well-being, is still, as Laios would know because he's in that field, is still quite broad, and you can take that, you can look at that and research that from many different angles, even within the field of behavioral science. But yeah, I wouldn't pick a university to do a PhD at. I would pick a topic and then see which people are in that topic and direct your search as such. I think if you have a lot of bigger behavioral science group, which LSE and Warwick both have big groups, so does Nottingham, by the way, so do Stirling and UCL have big groups as well. There is a variety of topics that are being studied in those groups. Those groups tend to be quite heavily interdisciplinary, so you will tend to, unless your topic is like super niche, you will tend to find at least a person or an affiliated person within that topic at almost every university. So I wouldn't be too concerned, but aim for the person, not the institution, I would advise.
Okay, thank you very much. So those are all the questions as for now. So let's continue with Laios' presentation.
Okay, I was muted, I don't know why. Okay, let's see if it works now. Where is it here? Is it working?
I can see you have 3 slides.
Yeah, so after Alina's presentation, which seemed like a Viva defense, I am going to be much more concise and more informal, I think, in mine. So my experience as a PhD, I would say, in one word, I would summarize it as underwhelming. So maybe you will find my presentation a bit negative, but I would consider it realistic, especially for those of you who are maybe older, who have spent a lot of time in industry like I did before deciding to transition into academia, or at least to transition into a PhD, which is a huge investment in terms of opportunity cost, especially since you've been working in industry for 5-6 years like I did. So my personal history is I'm from Peru. In Peru, the bachelor's degree lasts for 5 to 6 years. Unlike in the UK, where in 4 years you can have a bachelor's and a master's, and you're good to go with at 22. So after I finished my bachelor's degree in economics, I worked in public policy analysis, design, and implementation for about 5 to 6 years. But I didn't like the industry type of job. So in consulting, for example, it's very hierarchical. You work towards goals that not necessarily are aligned with your personal goals, and you have to answer to a boss. You have to comply with certain rules of for example, working from 9 to 11 p.m., stuff like that, right? So it's not, I didn't like it. I didn't see myself working in industry. I can see that you're very cool. I didn't see myself working in industry for a lot of time, at least for the next 40 years or 30 years. So what I did was I applied to first a master's, and then when I was doing my master's, I realized I wanted to do a PhD, because that's what originally I wanted to do. I wanted to do research when I was at uni in Peru, back in Peru. And that's why I did my research, and I ended up applying to several ones. I got accepted to Warwick with Nick Potavy, who does well-being, which I wanted to do. And I got a scholarship. That's also one of the reasons why I got into Warwick, and here I am. And why I say it's underwhelming is because I had very high expectations about the possibility of really transitioning into academia. And I know this is a very weird year because of COVID, but jobs in academia are very scarce compared to jobs in industry. So you have much more opportunities to go work in industry than in academia. And to work in academia, you need certain things that you need to take into account, I would say even before starting to look for PhDs, if you really want to become an academic. And these are basically four of the main questions I would ask myself before even trying to apply for a PhD, wherever you think you want to apply to. So the first one is whether I really want to be an academic. Because a lot of you maybe are like maybe Merle, that basically did every degree immediately. And maybe they're just young and you can just continue doing academic degrees, not necessarily thinking too much into the opportunity cost of doing so. I didn't have that opportunity. I started my PhD when I was 30, so it wasn't really an option to keep postponing it or to really think about transitioning into academia, waiting too much for that. So I really wanted to be an academic before starting the PhD, and that will determine how you conduct yourself during your PhD, I would say. And that should determine as well what are the things you have to look for during your PhD so that you are not underwhelmed when you're about to finish. Second question that I would ask myself is, if I want to be an academic or do research, where would I want to work at? A university, a college, a think tank, abroad, back home? Because this is a very important question to ask yourself. PhD programs are not the same across the world. PhD programs are different in the UK than in the US, and are different in mainland Europe, and within Europe are different in Germany and in France. So this is very important to take into account, and they also differ in how I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. But my point is that PhD programs are very different in how they train yourself to be an expert in your field, how they pay you. For example, in Germany, PhDs are like a job. So you get hired to do a PhD. You work for the university, you get a salary that's competitive for like industry-related research jobs. It's not like in the UK where you basically have to beg for money to do a PhD. In the US, it's a completely different system. You have basically you apply for a PhD like you would apply for a master's degree in anywhere in the world, and then you have 2 years of training, and then after those two years you have to write exams, and then you can basically do the research. So you have much more training, it's much more demanding, and you have a lot of time to go through. But on the other hand, if you did a PhD in the UK, for example, and somehow you wanted to go work in the US as an academic, maybe you think you can go into Harvard to be an assistant professor, think again, because universities in the US, I would say in my experience, don't consider European PhDs as maybe as thorough as the ones they give in the US. But I mean, those are things that you have to take into account. And related to that, as Merle was saying, I didn't get the chance to respond to the last question regarding whether to look for supervisors and to look for universities. So of course, choosing a good supervisor is very important, not only in the sense that they fit with your research interests, but also in the sense that they are good persons, because this is very important. I happen to have a very good experience in the sense that my supervisors are very nice people, and they have supported me emotionally in this process. But this is very important. But it is also important the university you're going to go to, because there are a lot of universities offering PhDs, and not all of those universities are in the position of really placing PhD students into academic jobs. And you don't know that beforehand. You know that when you go into the market and you go with your degree from a university that you think is good, but in the market it's not that relevant. And again, jobs in academia are scarce. So universities will tend to hire people that have good signals in quotation marks, a good academic degree from a good university that has good supervisors that are well known in the field, for example. Those are things that matter. I thought that they didn't matter so much before starting the PhD, but they do matter, especially if your aim as an academic is a very high one, or you think you want to be competitive in the academic market, or you have the dream of doing research that's relevant and everything like that. That's very important. You have to take that into account. And the third question is, what are my research interests and which department professors will be the best to suit them and help me achieve my potential? This is related to the question of looking for supervisors, right? So ideally, if you are very sure that you want to be an academic, that was my situation, because again, like I told you, I spent 6 years in industry and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I focused myself into finding a research area, a research project, a research proposal that I really wanted. So basically the research proposal I submitted for the PhD application is more or less the same as I'm writing now for my thesis. Of course, there are a lot of things that's changed during during my PhD, but the essence it's the same. So if you really want to be an academic, I think you have to have that you have to take that into account beforehand. It's very important. You will suffer a lot if you don't find that and you go through your PhD trying to find the research question you think it's important, because it's hard. It's tough to find something during the process because you think the time is running out, especially in at least in the business school where I'm at. You only have 4 years. You have to, if you think you're going to take more, you have to ask for extensions. It's not the same in other countries. Like I was saying, in the US, there is no clear deadline for you to finish your PhD. You can spend 7 years doing your thesis. That's fine. And finally, where will my funding come from? Again, especially if you are going to apply to the UK. UK doesn't fund PhDs generally. So if you get accepted into a PhD, you will get accepted like that, but you will need to find funding. As Merle suggested, I 100% agree with that. Do not do a PhD if you don't have funding for it. If you're going to pay for your PhD, I wouldn't suggest you do one, unless you are a millionaire or I don't know, or a football player that wants to branch out into other ventures. And where to find funding? Basically, look, in universities have scholarships. There are a lot of programs that also provide funding, like the ESRC, but I think now they only provide funding for EU students. Beforehand, it was they offered scholarship for everyone, but now no. So and also maybe some governments offer also scholarships, but you have to take that into account. It's very important. And then this last slide, which is a bit focused on the previous one, like answering the questions about the previous slide, is you need to take this into account. If you want to be an academic, you need to take this into account even since day one. You have to start working on this since day one. So I have from the presentation from the presentations I've heard so far, the focus has been much on the academic side, on how to find your topic, how to do research, how to structure your time. Those things are very important because in the end you need to finish your thesis. But the department is focused on you finishing your thesis, while as you should be focusing not only on that, but especially on trying to be competitive in the job market, which sometimes the department will not help you at all with this issue. I'm having this experience right now, for example. So in choosing supervisors, not only you need to be aware of the fit in terms of research and that you consider them good persons and nice people and that will support you and that will be there for you when you are in trouble. But there are more cold things to look for. For example, the junior and ambitious versus the senior and connected. Both have pros and cons. The junior and ambitious will probably be less connected than the senior supervisor, but it's more ambitious. They need to publish more, so they will be maybe asking you to write to help them with research projects that you can publish with them probably. They will be more invested in you finishing your thesis and also branching out into other working papers and other projects because they are also invested in that. They have a vested interest in publishing and ascending in the academic world, so to say. On the other hand, the senior and connected might already have been publishing a lot, maybe has a couple of books, maybe they just don't want to publish anymore. So in those cases, you will need to be more assertive. You will need to look for them, find them, offer them, topics to write about, stuff like that. And you will need to find them for guidance and supervision and stuff like that. It's a bit different, but they will be more connected. So they will be more known in the academic world, even in industry, in some places. And that's also a huge advantage because in the job market, networks are maybe all that matters in the end. So how do you, that's why conferences are very important as well. Not only because you learn to present, although, I mean, it's not like when I was thinking when people were talking about presenting at conferences, it's not like you go and present. You have to submit a proposal. You have to be accepted to that. I, for example, have had almost no luck in getting accepted into conferences to present, but I try to go to them either way to meet people. Because you need to meet people so that you can get known into the network of your specific research interest. And that's super important. Placement, this is based on the fact that you want to be an academic, or even in industry, but especially in academia. Placement, where do graduates go? At which universities do they end up working, if at universities at all? I would suggest, as a heuristic, since we are all in behavioral science, if your university department is not transparent in where their graduates go, then that's a bad signal. You need to find it very clear or ask them very clearly up front, if I graduate from this PhD, where I would end up working at. And this will be very, very revealing. So take that into account because it's very important. What will be my focus? The dissertation or working papers, hopefully publications. Now, in many departments, you have the option of doing a thesis that is comprised by 3 papers, which ideally are papers that you want to get published. So while working your thesis, you're also working in papers to be published. So you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I would suggest you focus on publishing and having working papers because that's a better signal for the market than you just having worked on your thesis all day long like the department wants you to do. So I would focus also on having working papers and other projects as well as the thesis. In the end, you can bound every project into 1 thesis and then defend it. And then mental health is very important. Since information asymmetry is too large, you will feel lost without structure, and this is something that will happen. Even if you are very strong mentally or you don't have any anxiety or depression problems, this will take its toll. So it's not a smooth ride, especially, as I say, because of information asymmetry, there are expectations that are not met and they will not be met. You have to know that beforehand. So be realistic in the way you approach the PhD. And rejections take their toll. So I've I have been used to rejections. I have a lot of experience applying to positions and not getting them a lot. In the PhD, however, this is maybe more salient because you submit papers to conferences, you submit them to journals, and the rule is that you will get rejected. And now I'm applying for jobs. I have applied for, I don't know, 55 jobs. So far, I've gotten 15 responses of rejection, not even shortlisting, straight rejection. So this takes its toll. You have to be aware of this, and you need to have mechanisms for coping with this, because you can get overwhelmed and throw everything, throw the baby with the bathwater, so to say. So I don't know. I think this is more realistic. A more realistic presentation. Some people will say negative. I don't know. I want to say it's realistic, but thank you for listening, and let's wait for the questions.
Thank you very much, Laios. There are already a couple of questions, and the first one is, so what you're saying is if your country offers a tuition waive on your PhD, you would then only highly recommend doing a PhD?
I don't understand I mean, the main idea is that you need to be funded for your PhD, so don't pay for your PhD. But it depends on which country you come from. It depends on your goals as well, because you can maybe, I don't know, in Peru, for example, right? Maybe I can get a PhD in my home country free because I'm funded, but realistically, I won't get any academic job with a PhD from a university from Peru. Maybe within Peru, but if you have more, how do you say, high-end objectives, in the sense that you have the dream of being an academic in a very competitive environment academically, you have to take that into account as well. So again, I could have done my PhD in Peru, maybe fully funded, but then if I had the objective of doing research anywhere else in the world, realistically that wouldn't have happened. So there are a lot of things to balance.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one comment thanking you for honesty and sharing your experiences. And then another question is, Laios, I missed the beginning of your presentation, so sorry if this is repetitive, but I wondered where you got your professional experience in evaluation of public and social policy.
Back in Peru. So I did my economics degree in Peru. Afterwards, I got a job in a think tank who did analysis of public policy. Then afterwards, I went to work for a newspaper where I basically wrote articles regarding analysis of public policy. And then I ended up in a consultancy firm, which did consulting for the public sector. So yeah, this is basically my professional path was this. And then afterwards, I got a position at the Ministry of Education in Peru as well, where I directly supervised the budgeting of state-led art schools, which was a very interesting job for me, especially to get to know the Peruvian state from within. It was very interesting.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is, I am currently pursuing my master's in behavioral science from India and directly aim at applying for a PhD in 2022. What prerequisites must I be mindful of and do in this 2 years to prepare myself for a PhD?
Again, depends on where do you want to apply for a PhD. If you want to apply for a PhD in the US, you need to take into account that you need a GRE score, and a GRE score that's top notch. So 99th percentile, for example, something like that. If you want to get into a good PhD program, because again, that also matters. So it's not like just you want to do a PhD and therefore you're a doctor and everyone wants to hire you. No, where you do the PhD also matters. So again, if you want to do a PhD in the US, you need to take that into account. Maybe less the research proposal. the GRE is more important, your letters of recommendation are more important, your statement of purpose is more important. In the UK, for example, you don't need the GRE for most of PhD programs, our GRE score, but you need a research proposal, and you need, I would suggest you contact supervisors beforehand, as Simon suggested. So look for potential supervisors in departments and write them emails, like directly, with a presentation of yourself and your research topics, and whether you see them a fit for your research interests. And in that way, when you apply officially for the position, they will see that you are applying, and they will vouch for you when they see your application. And maybe stuff like grades or statements of purpose and all those formal things are less important than the supervisor's acceptance. And in Germany, for example, I know the German market, PhD positions are offered as job openings. So you will need to apply to them as if it were a job opening, and it's completely different. Normally, PhD positions are aligned to a project that has won a grant or something like that has a lot of money, and they want to hire PhDs. So again, it depends on where you want to do the PhD, but I wouldn't, if you have the time to do this and you're very keen on trying to do the PhD, I would suggest you prepare for the GRE. I think having that is a good thing. It opens more doors.
Okay, thank you very much. Then the question is kind of connected, and I think might be answered by all of you. When applying to jobs, do you compete against applicants with master degree? Or do you feel like you are in a more advantageous position because you have a PhD? Also, is there a negative prejudice from organizations against applicants with PhDs?
I'm going to wildly assume that the organizations that are being referred to means that you're moving into industry. Because I don't think we are competing with master students in academia. At least I hope not, because in that case I won the refund. Yeah, no, come on.
Me too.
It's really, really interesting, and it depends on how niche you want to find your job. If you are applying to, let's say, one of the big companies, for example, like Ogilvy, which is very known for having a very strong behavioral science unit, but it is essentially a marketing consultancy, you are competing against anyone who's ever had an interest in being in the behavioral science industry, because they're a titan in the field and a lot of people want to work for them. This can be undergrads, masters, you with the PhD, probably also other PhD students, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's people with like 20 years of work experience still looking in this job. Keep in mind, behavioral science or behavioral econ as a field is, especially within industry, relatively new. And there's also a difference between being in a field or being in a company that does good, actual and good behavioral science, and people who claim they are doing behavioral science. So you might be competing against God knows who.
Also, if I may interject, in my experience hiring people and working in industry values experience much more than academic degrees. So be aware of that in the sense that unless it's a position in industry that's advertised directly for experts in a field and not necessarily in industry, for example, I don't know, behavioral and data science are two fields that are getting a lot of much more industry exposures than other academic fields. If they hire a data scientist, maybe they will prefer a PhD graduate because they would think that it's an expert. But in terms of ascending into the industry order, being a manager, a regional manager, whatever, in a consulting firm, for example, they value experience much more. So even if you have a PhD, it's probable that you will start from the very beginning if you want to transition into industry. So you have to take that into account.
I wanted just to jump in as well, because so my industry experience was actually in HR and diversity and inclusion and hiring. So I guess I can help with this question. There is a lot of shift going on regarding, well, I hope to think so, but at least where we're going, let's say politically, is that diversity needs to be included in the hiring process, and companies start to take it seriously. And this is also related to names of the universities, names of your school, and so forth. So, so regarding like who you are and who you are competing with, you need to know your skill set. You need to know yourself. For this, obviously, ask for feedback, everyone, but also try it out because, yeah, Laios, I know that you applied for 55 jobs. I have less, but yeah, it all depends on where you fit, and also, yeah, probably your network as well. So try to connect with people, try to talk to people to understand where you're actually fitting in. Otherwise, it can be quite difficult. In industry as well, I wanted to add that skill set, not maybe experience. So when we say experience, it's experience based on like your particular fields or your particular, well, industry, because I guess academia can be also industry, but like in a specific field. So in industry, it's more about like project management and management of stakeholders, whatever are these terms, and communication, which means that you have to be on emails and meetings all the time. So you have to understand, yeah, whether you're actually good at it. But in academia, it's slightly different. So you're more autonomous, I guess. You need to manage yourself quite well. So yeah, think about where you fit, I guess. This is my wrapping.
Okay, thank you very much. Then on to the next question. Would it be stupid to pursue a PhD and not want to do a career in academics? I just want to do it to learn more about behavioral science, but I know I want to jump back to work for an organization straight after it.
I don't think it's stupid because it's exactly the same plan I have.
I would say it depends. It depends on your objective, right? I mean, if you don't want to be an academic and you know that beforehand, then I would consider that you see the PhD just as an experience to do research or to get another degree. So if that's what you like to do, that's fine. That's totally fine. But if you want to be an academic, the thing is, if you want to be in academia, you need a PhD. But to be in industry, you don't. That's basically
I think within the PhD, this is why I hammered home the thing about conferences so much. Like, you need to network, and networking can be very, very hard. But if you want to come out of a PhD and you want to move into industry, the whole horizon and context in which you will do networking, in which you will do outreach, and in which you will have to present yourself is going to be very, very different. And it might be nice for you to know academics, especially if they have a lot of industry collaborations, but what you actually need to get to know and where you need to build your network is within industries that align with what you actually want to do. So it would be helpful if your PhD is very much industry oriented. This can be through actually collaborating with a company, focusing on a topic which is very, very relevant and can actually be directly implemented into industry. Or an entire PhD which is funded by a company, I suppose would be ideal, because you technically speaking wouldn't even leave the company, so that would be really, really useful. It's just that there's different ways of getting into industry, but keep in mind that, and I think this is in general just something that you really have to keep in mind if you go into the PhD with the idea of still wanting to go into industry. A lot of industry has absolutely no clue what a PhD is. They know what it means to have worked for Ogilvy for 4 years. They know what it means to have been a product manager for 4 years. That is quite clear, but you need to be able to write a CV or a motivation letter or a LinkedIn profile or build a network that knows exactly what the fuck you've been doing for 4 years, because that is not clear from the fact that you're a doctor in behavioral science. So the type of self-marketing that you're going to do is going to be very different, and it might actually to some extent be very much quite aggressive. And for people, especially the British, are awful at this, but you need to be really loud about yourself and your ability and your skill set, because they've got no clue. On average, industry is pretty bad at valuing a PhD. So it's about how you sell it. And that for some people is quite difficult, and for some people it's the easiest thing ever. So keep that in mind. It's just a different ball game because the context is so different.
One other point, I think you should examine why you really want to do the PhD, like what is pulling you towards it. Because I think to be successful and to not have a horrible time for the next 4 years is to really care about the subject, like actually want to know the answers. Like the extrinsic motivation of, well, getting a PhD or your supervisor getting on your back, anything like that is just not good enough. You have to really care. And when you do care, a PhD is a really positive experience. So yeah, examine the reasons why. Like, do you really want to know the answers to some specific field or questions? Because that's what will make it work for you. Outside of what it means for your future, just for those 4 years, making those 4 years a pleasant experience.
Yeah, this is, it has to be emphasized without, you know, scaring you away from a PhD. But the PhD is a multiple-year commitment. Whereas so I came straight out of education, and so my friends who I did my master's with, they went in these trajectories, and where after every, say, 2-ish years, you either switch jobs or you get a promotion. A PhD is stagnant. You're not doing anything else for 4 years, and that can be, from a social comparison perspective, that can just knock you out because people around you are progressing, given that they're not in the PhD, but you to some extent are not, because your job title isn't changing. But I think Simon raised a really, really good point. There is no reason to not do a PhD because you don't necessarily want to be in academia, but you need to be damn sure about why you want to start this PhD. And wanting a doctor's title is not going to get you through 4 years of mental ups and downs. It won't see you through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will just wanted to add that on LinkedIn recently I saw a post. Yeah, there were lots of likes about what is actually a PhD. It's like, wow, okay, that's actually, yeah, people don't know. So yeah, I would also add that, yeah, you have to advertise yourself. This is the hard-learned question, I guess, lesson I had to learn, is that you have to be really confident. But of course, you have to know your skill set. And this is maybe difficult given PhD's ups and downs. And as you saw, like in my presentation, the last stage is not as helpful for understanding what you're good at. So yeah, but I should say that industry is now really keen for getting PhDs, or at least I was told so, and for obvious reasons, because we can do research, and research now is finally valued. So yeah, this is, yeah, my kind of reflection on this.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we're gonna only take 2 more questions because we're already over the time limit. So this one is directed for Laios. How difficult was the transition from a public policy consultancy to doing a PhD?
I'm not sure whether you mean transitioning in the sense of the type of job, or whether it was difficult to get accepted into the PhD. If it's the second thing, it wasn't. In the UK at least, because I didn't have a GRE score. I didn't have time to study for the GRE, so I couldn't apply to the US, and the US is too long of an opportunity cost for me at 30. I considered that beforehand. So since I applied to the UK, I wrote to my potential supervisor, and my research proposal, he found it very, very good. And then I got accepted, and luckily I got the scholarship. That's why I am here, basically. If I wouldn't have had the scholarship, I wouldn't be here. So in that sense, it wasn't difficult. What was difficult was to transition from a very structured type of work in consultancy, for example, towards a no structure, do your own thing environment. That was a bit hard, especially in year 2, because year 1 you have modules, so more or less you have a structure. But year 2 was very tough for me. That was the first time in, I don't know, maybe 10 years that I didn't have any structure at all to work. So I needed to structure myself to get things done. So that was tough. That was one of the things that was tough. And the other thing is that it depends on what is your methodological approach towards your thesis. In my case, I do experiments and I do microeconometrics. So I'm a quantitative social scientist, so to say. So when I was working, of course, I wasn't applying all those methods that I learned in my bachelor's degree. So luckily, during my professional experience, I kind of wanted to keep applying those tools into things I did, but on the side. So when I arrived at the PhD and I needed to run regressions and looked at statistics and all of those things, it wasn't that hard for me to catch up, so to say. But if you have been in industry for 5-6 years, not doing anything related to that, and then you want to do the PhD, and then you want to prove your hypothesis or falsify your hypothesis with quantitative data or experimental methods, is going to be a bit tough, because you need to relearn not only the statistics behind all the things you were going to do, but also the programming, which is nowadays even more important, and all of those things. So that might be tricky, unless you want to do qualitative studies, which maybe it's easier. I don't know. So yeah, it was difficult on those sides.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question. Just finished an honors in economics. I have no opportunity for formal behavioral economics study. Intending to enter a PhD in behavioral economics mid-2022. What's the best study to undertake this year to be most attractive to programs outside of behavioral economics, behavioral science? It has been recommended to me to look into statistics, psychology.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite topics ever, because it's entirely about semantics, and this semantics I can do. There is a difference between doing something in behavioral economics and something in behavioral science, and this is something that doesn't get explained properly. So you have an honors in economics, good for you, congratulations on finishing it, and you want to go to a PhD, also cool. Now, if you do another master's, which is fully in economics, but might have a behavioral course in it, you can do a PhD in behavioral economics, because you cannot get into a PhD of behavioral economics if you're not a full-fledged economist. So if you want to work for an economics department, you can't study psychology for a master's, because they won't accept you. Now, if you want to do something which is behavioral science, which is more an umbrella term for a variety of fields that study behavior, including economics, you can do a master's which falls anywhere in this umbrella. So you could do a master's in psychology, stats, data science, anything econ related, that's still completely fine. As long as it focuses on a behavioral science. There are loads of masters within the UK specifically, which are behavioral and econ or behavioral science based, or I think UCL has cognitive decision science. I think CDS is a master's they have. Of course, Warwick has the behavioral and economic science one. And that is the difference. So I think for you, the main question is, so would I recommend you do a master's degree? Yes. But it is a question for yourself, whether you want to do behavioral science in an economics department and as such do behavioral economics, because that really limits your choices of doing a master's, because it will have to be an economics master and has to be recognized as such. If that is not the case and you're perfectly happy working in a psychology department or a business school for a behavioral science or a marketing group, then your choice is much more open. So for me, I think that would be the main thing to focus on. Figure out what you prefer.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Merle in the economics science distinction. It's very important, and that you need to take that into account. Also, I would add, if you want to do a PhD in the UK, you have to have a taught master's. So you need one. That's a requisite. And if you were asking only for types of courses, you maybe will make you more competitive. I will suggest not only that they will make you more competitive, but they will make your life easier, that you learn to code, either in R or in Stata, for example. This is very important, or Python, because if you want to do experimental methods or, again, quantitative methods, you need to know this.
Yeah.
This is something that you have to know.
Yeah, I suppose the advice is, if you don't want to study a formal master's and you think you can get in with an undergrad, I mean, if you can, props to you. Just spend an entire year learning how to code. Become a data scientist.
It will save so much time for you if you.
It will save you many tears. It will save you blood, sweat, and tears. I promise.
Yeah, that's a good point, that you actually need to know how to code, at least something of it, in order to do research these days. So yeah, better get into programming somehow. But I also wanted to add, maybe summer schools. It's a good idea. So they're much cheaper than masters, and they can be quite intense and high level in terms of like quality. So yeah, maybe look into those as well.
They look good on the CV. They're good for networking as well.
Also give you some kind of experience doing data science, and you can see whether you enjoy it or whether you absolutely hate doing it. Because if you hate doing it, then that's useful information to know before starting a PhD.
Oh yeah, for sure. If coding is the way, if you've been at coding for 3 solid months full time, you've done nothing else, and you hate it, and you wish you never looked at R, Stata, MATLAB, Python ever, which is currently my frame of mind, then a PhD is not for you. Well,
maybe I'm just like keeping.
Not in behavioral science.
Yeah, behavioral science is a lot of coding. Like, even if your methodology is entirely experimental, you'll end up coding up your experiments. Like, it's how to code the experiment, how to analyze the experiment. There is so much coding involved. But if you genuinely would rather jump off a bridge than code, a behavioral scientific PhD is really not for you. If you can derive some type of enjoyment from it, maybe sometimes is good enough. But coding is a really big part of a PhD in behavioral science.
I will just add that probably in the first 3 months or 4 or 5 or half a year, you probably won't like it as such, but like after you become better and better at it, probably it becomes more pleasurable.
Yeah, exactly. When you see that your little sentence generates something magically, then you get excited and you like it.
Yeah, and then when it keeps crashing, you just have to shut down the laptop and cry with a bottle of wine in front.
I should add statistics as well as the programming. Like, understanding the statistics well is such a massive benefit, and you can just start learning that at any time. So, and I don't just mean running t-tests and regressions, but really getting deep into it, because it can be really interesting. I mean, I personally really enjoy statistical stuff. It's kind of an advantage.
Yeah, I think to come back to the initial question that we were discussing, if you've come out of an economics honors, obviously we've got no real clue what your background is, because we don't know from which university it is, so we're guessing what your knowledge of coding and statistics is. But if you feel specifically that you're lacking in one of these fields, if you generally feel like you have absolutely zero statistical knowledge, or you really don't know how to code, I know people who've come out of undergrad with effectively zero of these skills. Then it might be good to have a master that is either entirely in this topic or is very heavily grounded in this topic, to make sure that you get these skills, which will make you more competitive, so both in and after the PhD, but will also make sure that you are able to have a decent PhD and literally not open Art Studio for the first time on day 1 of your PhD, because that's not gonna be great. Is a recommendation. I know people who came into behavioral science with backgrounds in computer science, and they seem to do quite well.
All right, thank you very much for all those answers. And we're going to end with a comment from one of the attendees, which is saying, "This has been great. Thank you very much for the honesty. There aren't many spaces where you can hear so transparent opinions," and I think I can also agree with that. So thank you very much. all the amazing presenters we had today, for all your honest opinions and sharing your experience doing the PhD. I hope it was helpful for all the attendees, and thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime.
And good luck.
Yeah, definitely.